Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord. The Egyptians you see today, you shall never see again. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance of the Lord. Do not be afraid, for he is with us. You expect me to fear your slave god? You are nothing but a fool, Moses. Run for your lives! Take cover now! Keep moving! Do not look back!
Mother, where are you?
It is blinding! Cover your face! Move quickly! You must wake up now, my great lord. My son! What have they done to you? Go! Serve your lord as you have said. Take your flocks and your herds and be gone! Advance! We must catch them! Go faster! The walls are falling!
Before we get into this story, let me just tell you something. This is not a fairy tale. This is not a myth someone made up around a campfire. This is the story of a real man who lived a real life, full of real pain, real fear, real failure, and real moments of something so extraordinary that people have been talking about it for thousands of years. This is the story of Moses. And what makes Moses so fascinating is not that he was a superhero. It is actually the opposite. Moses was deeply, painfully human. He was a man who ran away from his problems, a man who stood in front of a burning bush and still said, "I don't think I'm the right person for this." A man who lost his temper at the worst possible moment and paid a price that would break your heart. He was flawed. He was afraid. He doubted himself constantly. And yet, God chose him. Out of everyone in the world, out of every polished, powerful, eloquent person alive at the time, God chose a stuttering shepherd hiding in the desert. And through that one broken, reluctant man, 2 million people walked out of slavery and into freedom. That tells you something. That tells you that the people who change the world are rarely the ones who felt ready. They are usually the ones who showed up anyway, shaking in their sandals, and did it afraid. So sit with this, because this story has everything. A baby floating on a river, a burning bush that would not stop burning, the most powerful empire on earth brought to its knees by 10 plagues, a sea splitting open like a curtain being pulled back, a people wandering in a desert for 40 years, learning slowly, painfully, what it actually means to be free. This is Moses, from the very beginning all the way to his last breath on a mountaintop. Let's go. It starts in Egypt. And Egypt at this time was the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. We are talking about a civilization so advanced, so organized, so dominant that the rest of the world looked at it the way people today look at a superpower. The Nile River made the land rich. The pharaoh ruled like a god, and the monuments they were building, massive, towering structures of stone, were announcements to the whole world that Egypt was untouchable. But inside that empire, hidden in the labor camps and the mud brick fields, was a people in chains, the Israelites. They had come to Egypt generations ago during a famine, following a man named Joseph. But that was long ago. The pharaoh who had welcomed them was dead, and the new pharaoh looked at the growing number of Israelites and felt something cold move through him. fear. This God king, this man who commanded armies and built wonders, was afraid of slaves because they were multiplying so fast, because if it ever came to war, they might join the enemy. And so he did what frightened, powerful men have always done throughout history. He got cruel. He made their lives harder. More bricks, more labor, less rest, more pain. He appointed brutal slave masters over them. He wanted to break them. But they kept growing. So Pharaoh went further. He called the Hebrew midwives, the women who delivered the babies, and gave them a command that was pure evil. Every Hebrew baby boy that was born, kill him at birth. Quietly, make it look like an accident. The midwives refused. They feared God more than they feared Pharaoh, and so the babies lived. So Pharaoh went even further. He made it a public decree. Every Hebrew baby boy that is born, throw him into the Nile River. Drown him. His own people could carry it out. His soldiers could enforce it. A genocide hidden inside an empire disguised as a policy. And into this horror, a woman named Jochebed gave birth to a son. She looked at this tiny baby boy, this breathing, beautiful, perfect little person, and she made a decision. She was not giving him up. Not to Pharaoh, not to the soldiers, not to the river, not yet. She hid him. For 3 months she hid a baby in a house full of people, in a neighborhood crawling with soldiers. Every cry had to be silenced. Every knock at the door was a moment of pure terror. She held him in the dark and prayed with everything she had. But babies grow. Their lungs get stronger. Their voices get louder. And Jochebed knew the day was coming when she simply could not hide him anymore. So she made a basket. She took reeds from the river, wove them together, sealed the whole thing with tar and pitch to make it waterproof. She made a little boat, and she placed her son inside it, and she walked to the Nile, the very river that was supposed to be his grave, and she set him on the water. That moment, can you imagine that moment? Letting go of the basket, watching it drift, walking away without your child. That is not weakness. That is the most agonizing kind of trust in the world. She was placing her son into the hands of God because her own hands could no longer protect him. His older sister Miriam stayed behind, hidden in the reeds, watching that little basket floating on the current, heart hammering in her chest. And then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to the river to bathe. She saw the basket. She sent her servant to get it. She opened it, and the baby cried. Something happened inside this princess in that moment. The Bible says she had compassion on him. She knew exactly what he was. She could see he was a Hebrew baby. She knew her father's law, and she chose right there by the water to defy it. She was the daughter of the man who had ordered these babies drowned, and she reached into the river and pulled one out. Miriam stepped forward, this brave, quick-thinking girl, and said very casually, "Should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" The princess said yes, and Miriam ran, and she came back with her own mother, with Jochebed. The princess handed Jochebed her own son back and told her she would be paid to care for her own child. Paid to care for her own child. God had turned the whole thing inside out. The very system designed to kill this baby had just funded his survival. When the boy was old enough, Jochebed brought him back to the palace, and the princess raised him as her own son. She gave him a name, Moses, which means drawn out of the water. The boy who was supposed to die in the Nile was now growing up in the house of the man who had ordered his death. You genuinely cannot make this up. Moses grew up inside the most powerful household on earth. He had tutors and teachers. He had access to everything Egypt had to offer. He ate well, dressed well, learned well. By every external measure, he was royalty. But he always knew. There was something in him that always knew those people in the fields were his people, that the ones under the whips, the ones carrying the bricks in the blazing heat, were he, and them were him, and he was them. One day, as a grown man, Moses went out to watch the Israelites working, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. He looked around. He saw no one watching, and he killed the Egyptian. He buried him in the sand and walked away. He thought it was over. The next day he went out again and saw two Hebrew men fighting each other. He tried to step in, and the one in the wrong turned on him and said, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Are you going to kill me like you killed that Egyptian yesterday?" Moses froze. It was out. People knew, and within hours Pharaoh knew, and Pharaoh wanted Moses dead. Moses ran. He left the palace, left Egypt, left everything, and ran all the way to a land called Midian. He had nothing, no title, no home, no identity. He wasn't really Egyptian. He had never truly belonged there. He wasn't living as a Hebrew. He had grown up apart from them. He was a man in between two worlds, belonging to neither, sitting alone by a well in the middle of the desert with nothing but the clothes on his back and a crime behind him. But even at his lowest point, he still couldn't stop himself from helping people. Some shepherds were bullying a group of 7 sisters who had come to water their flocks, and Moses stood up and chased the shepherds off and helped the women. A fugitive with nothing, and still he stood up for the weak. Their father, a priest named Jethro, invited Moses to stay. Moses ended up marrying one of the daughters, a woman named Zipporah. He had a son. He became a shepherd. He tended flocks in the desert, and the years passed. 10 years, 20 years, 30, 40. Moses the prince became Moses the shepherd. The man who had grown up in Pharaoh's palace was now an old man walking behind sheep in the wilderness. And maybe he had quietly accepted that this was his life now, that the other life, the burning rage he had felt when he saw his people suffering, that was behind him. Maybe he had buried it the way he buried that Egyptian in the sand. But God had not forgotten. One day, on an ordinary hillside near a mountain called Horeb, Moses saw something strange. A bush was on fire, which was not all that unusual in the dry desert heat, but it wasn't burning up. The fire just kept going. The bush kept burning without being consumed. Moses turned aside to look, and God called his name from inside the fire. "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." God told him to take off his sandals because the ground he was standing on was holy. And then God said something that is worth stopping on for just a moment. He said, "I have seen the misery of my people. I have heard them crying out. I know their suffering. I have come down to rescue them. I have seen, I have heard, I know." That is not the language of a distant, indifferent force somewhere in the universe. That is the language of someone who is paying attention, someone who has been watching and feeling and waiting for the right moment. And the right moment was now. And God told Moses, "I am sending you to Pharaoh. Go bring my people out of Egypt." Moses' response was essentially, "Please no." He said, "Who am I to do this?" He said, "What if they don't believe me?" He said, "I am not a good speaker. I never have been. I'm slow of speech and tongue." He gave 5 separate excuses. 5. This man was standing in front of a burning bush that had been on fire this whole time and had not burned up, and he was still looking for reasons to say no. But God gave him signs. He threw his staff on the ground, and it became a snake. He picked it up, and it was a staff again. He put his hand inside his robe and pulled it out leprous, white as snow. He put it back in and pulled it out healed. God told him his brother Aaron would speak for him, that he would be the voice, and Moses would give him the words. And Moses, still afraid, still uncertain, still so deeply human, went back to Egypt. He walked back into the most powerful empire on earth with a wooden staff and a word from God. He stood before Pharaoh, and he said the words that would echo through all of human history. "Let my people go."
You expect me to fear your...
Pharaoh laughed. He said, "Who is this God you're talking about? I don't know him, and I'm not letting anyone go." And to make his point, he made life even harder for the Israelites. Now they had to gather their own straw to make the bricks, but the quota stayed the same. The Israelites turned on Moses in frustration. Even the people he was trying to free were angry at him. This is leadership. This is what it actually looks like. You try to help people, and at first it gets worse, not better. And the people you were trying to help blame you for it. Moses went back to God and said, "Why did you send me? Nothing has gotten better. Everything has gotten worse." And God said, "Watch what I do next." What came next was 10 plagues, and they were not gentle. The Nile turned to blood. Every source of water in Egypt turned to blood. The fish died. The river stank. The Egyptians could not drink from it. And after a little while, Pharaoh hardened his heart and said no. Then came frogs, millions of them. They came up from the water and covered everything. They were in the houses, in the beds, in the bread bowls, in the ovens. Egypt was drowning in frogs. Pharaoh called Moses in a panic and said, "Please pray to your God to take the frogs away, and I will let the people go." Moses prayed. The frogs died. They piled them up in heaps, and the land stank. And then Pharaoh changed his mind. This happened over and over. Plague comes, Pharaoh panics, promises to let the people go. Moses prays for relief. Plague ends, Pharaoh goes back on his word. Lice that came up from the dust and covered every person and animal in Egypt. Swarms of flies so thick they filled the houses and corrupted the land. Disease that killed the Egyptian livestock while the Israelite animals stood untouched. Boils that broke out on every Egyptian body, so painful that even Pharaoh's own magicians could not stand before Moses. Hail mixed with fire that destroyed every crop still in the field. Locusts that ate everything the hail had left behind. And then 3 days of a darkness so thick, so complete, that the Bible says it could be felt. You could reach out and touch it. Egypt sat in a darkness they could feel pressing against their skin, while the Israelites had light in their homes. 10 times Moses went to Pharaoh. 10 times Pharaoh said no, or said yes and then changed his mind. 10 plagues tore through Egypt, each one more devastating than the last, and still Pharaoh would not let them go. Until the 10th plague. God told Moses, "One more plague is coming, and after this one, Pharaoh will not just let the people go, he will beg you to leave." At midnight, God would pass through Egypt, and the firstborn of every family would die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh sitting on his throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner in the dungeon, to the firstborn of every animal in the field. But there was a way out. God told Moses, every Israelite family must take a lamb. It had to be perfect, without any defect. They were to slaughter it at twilight, and put the blood on the 2 sides and the top of the doorframe of their house. And when the death came through Egypt that night, it would see the blood and pass over that house. They were also told, "Eat this meal standing up, sandals on your feet, staff in your hand. Eat it like someone who is about to move, because tonight you leave." And so in every Israelite home, families gathered around their tables in the dark, lamb roasting over the fire, door frames marked with blood, dressed and ready, eating fast. The children must have felt the electricity in the air. Something was happening. Something was about to change forever. At midnight, God moved through Egypt, and a sound broke out across the nation that no one who heard it ever forgot. The sound of parents discovering their firstborn children were dead. From the palace to the prison, there was not a house without someone dead. Pharaoh's own son, the heir to the throne of Egypt, was gone. And this time, Pharaoh did not negotiate. He called for Moses in the night and said, "Get out, take your people, take your flocks, take your herds, take everything. Go now." The Egyptians were pressing the Israelites out of the country, practically throwing gold and silver jewelry at them, saying, "Please just go before anyone else dies." 2 million people walked out of Egypt that night in the dark, free. For the first time in 400 years, they were free. But freedom is rarely clean, and Pharaoh, sitting in his ruined, grieving kingdom, looked out at the horizon and had a thought that proud, broken men always have. He thought about what he had lost, and he gathered his army, 600 of his best chariots, his finest soldiers, and he chased after them. The Israelites looked up and saw the cloud of dust rising behind them, an army, Pharaoh's army, bearing down on them fast. They looked ahead, and there was the Red Sea, wide and unforgiving. There was nowhere to go. They were trapped between the army and the water. And they turned on Moses, not for the last time. They said, "Were there no graves in Egypt? Did you bring us all the way out here to die in the desert? We told you to leave us alone. We would rather be slaves in Egypt than corpses in this desert." 400 years of slavery, and the first time things got hard in freedom, they wanted to go back. That is not weakness, that is just human. Freedom is terrifying when you do not know how to live in it yet. Moses turned to the people and said, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm. You will never see these Egyptians again after today. God will fight for you. You only need to be still." And then Moses stretched his staff out over the sea. The wind came, a strong east wind, and it blew all night, and the water began to move. It pulled back to the right and to the left, and walls of water stood up on both sides, and between them, dry ground. Not mud, not wet sand, dry ground. And 2 million people walked through the sea. Think about that for a moment. Walls of water on both sides, a path of dry ground beneath their feet, the whole impossible thing holding open just long enough for every man, woman, child, flock, and herd to cross to the other side. When they were all through, Moses stretched his hand out again, and the water came crashing back down. The chariots, the horses, the soldiers, all of it swallowed. Not one of them survived. And the Israelites stood on the other side and watched, and they sang. Moses and Miriam led them in a song on the shore, and they danced, because they were alive and they were free, and the sea had fought for them. That was the high point. What followed was 40 years of desert. And the desert was hard, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. The Israelites were free people who had only ever known slavery. They did not know how to govern themselves. They did not know how to trust. They had spent 400 years being told what to do, having every decision made for them, living in fear. And now they had to learn how to be a nation, how to be free. And it was messy, and it was painful, and it took much longer than anyone wanted. They got hungry and complained. God sent manna, bread from the sky, every single morning, except the Sabbath, for 40 years. They got thirsty and complained. God brought water from a rock. They got bored and complained. They got scared and complained. They looked back at Egypt and said, "At least there we had meat and fish and cucumbers," completely forgetting the whips and the chains and the dead babies, because memory is selective when the present is uncomfortable. And Moses bore it. He bore all of it. The complaining, the rebellion, the ingratitude. He was the mediator, the judge, the leader, the prophet. His father-in-law Jethro came to visit and watched Moses sit there from morning to evening with a line of people bringing him disputes, and said, "Son, you are going to wear yourself out. You cannot do all of this alone. You need to delegate." And Moses listened, because even great leaders need someone to speak truth to them. In the middle of those desert years came the holiest moment. God called Moses up to Mount Sinai. Moses climbed the mountain and disappeared into the cloud. For 40 days and 40 nights he was up there. No food, no water, just presence. Just God. And God gave him the 10 Commandments, carved into 2 stone tablets by the hand of God. Not just rules, the foundation of how a civilization built on justice and dignity actually functions. Do not murder, do not steal, do not lie, honor your parents, rest. Remember that there is something bigger than you and your ambitions. But when Moses came back down the mountain, something had changed in his face. The Bible says his skin was actually glowing. He had spent so much time in the presence of God that the light had gotten into him. People could not look directly at him. But before he even got to the bottom of the mountain, he heard something. Music, celebration. He rounded the final bend and stopped. His people were dancing around a golden calf. They had taken their gold jewelry and melted it down and shaped it into an idol, and they were worshiping it. While he was up the mountain, while God was writing out the commandments with his own finger, the people down below had decided they needed something they could see and touch and point to. Moses threw the stone tablets to the ground and shattered them. He was furious. He was heartbroken. He destroyed the idol, ground it into powder, mixed it with water, and made the people drink it. And then he did something that tells you everything you need to know about who Moses was. He went back up the mountain, and he stood before God on behalf of the same people who had just done this, and he said, "Please forgive them. They have sinned terribly, I know, but if you will not forgive them, then blot my name out of your book too. I go down with my people." In his anger, he could shatter stone tablets, but in his love, he was willing to be destroyed alongside the people who had just broken his heart. That is a depth of love that most people never reach. God forgave them and carved the commandments again. But the desert years also brought Moses' greatest personal failure. And it was so simple, so human, and the consequences were so devastating. The people were complaining about water again. God told Moses to speak to a rock and water would come out. But Moses was tired. He had been tired for years. He was carrying the weight of an entire nation, and they had complained every single day of the journey. He was done. He raised his staff and he struck the rock twice in anger. The water still came. The people still drank. But God said to Moses, "Because you did not trust me, because you let your anger speak instead of my word, you will not lead the people into the promised land. You will see it, but you will not enter it." After everything, after Egypt and Pharaoh and the plagues and the sea and 40 years of desert and a nation on his back, Moses would come all the way to the edge and not cross over. There is something in that is so raw and so honest. Moses was not exempt. His mistakes had consequences, just like everyone else's. God loved him completely and still held him accountable. That is not cruelty. That is the truth that none of us get to skip the cost of our choices, no matter how much good we have done. The years passed. The whole generation that had come out of Egypt, the ones who had been too broken and too afraid to trust, they died in the desert as God had said they would. A new generation grew up in the wilderness, stronger, braver, ready. And Moses was 120 years old. God told him, "Climb Mount Nebo, go to the top and look." Moses climbed. One last climb, and he stood on the top of the mountain and he looked out, and he could see all of it. The land of Gilead stretching out before him, the whole sweep of the land that had been promised to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, green hills and valleys and the Jordan River threading through it all. The promised land, real and right there, just across the river. And there, on that mountain, with that view in front of him, Moses died. The Bible says his eyes were not dim, his strength had not failed. He did not die weak and worn out. He died whole on a mountaintop, looking at the destination he had spent his entire life pointing other people toward. God himself buried Moses, and no one has ever found a grave. The people mourned for 30 days, and then they crossed the Jordan. They went in. The land that had been a promise for 400 years became a reality. Moses did not cross with them, but he got them there. Every single step of the way, he got them there. And here's what stays with you when you sit with this whole story. Moses was not chosen because he was perfect. He was a murderer. He stuttered. He lost his temper. He argued with God. He got overwhelmed. He made a mistake so significant it cost him everything he had worked toward. But he kept showing up. That is what Moses did. Every single time the road got impossible, Moses showed up. When the bush burned, he turned aside. When Pharaoh laughed, he came back. When the sea was in front of him and the army was behind him, he told the people to stand firm. When his people danced around an idol, he interceded for them. When he was exhausted and done, he kept going. He was a man who was pulled out of a river as a baby and spent his whole life making sure other people did not drown. And thousands of years later, we are still telling his story.
Go, serve your Lord as you have said. Take your flocks and your herds and be gone!